Hello everyone, welcome and thank you for coming to attend our webinar, Introduction to the Kanban Method. Let's get started. So I like to start these conversations with a little bit of background or a little bit of context. So I always start with, I like to ask questions. So I'm going to start with, why are we here? And there's a lot of reasons why we're always looking to do process improvement. And these are things that we hear our environment. We have features that take a long time to develop. We have releases that are long out. We got lots and lots of bugs. We have the business doing stuff because we don't have time and space. And I like to think of these things not so much as problems as they are actually symptoms of problems. Why do these things occur? And that leads us to other questions that we want to ask about, what problems are we encountering as an industry? And I like to sort of boil it down to that. I think at our root, we have a lot of work and not enough capacity, and we're being driven to perform or behave in ways that are not necessarily the best as far as quality and workload. So there's lots of work and not enough capacity, and when that happens, we start to behave in weird ways. The first thing that we tend to do is we tend to sort of start taking shortcuts, and quality starts to suffer. And in our industry, a lot of the work that we end up doing is actually rework or remediation of bugs and stuff like that. So we're actually adding to our workload because we have too much work already. The next thing that tends to happen is now we start to delay features or they get cut from the program. And this is bad because this is actually affecting our customers. Our customers are the ones that wanted these features, but because of project constraints or scheduling constraints or all these challenges that we're facing, we just have to start cutting things to meet financial expectations. The next thing that I sort of see a lot of is that I see the accumulation of technical debt. Now, some people might think this is a quality issue, and it does contribute to quality issues, but I think that the accumulation of technical debt is actually something sort of in and of itself. It just slows us down. Not so much quality, because we can still create a bug-free product, but the whole thing is not amenable to us quickly expanding or enhancing features because we start to accumulate this technical debt inside of our application or implementation. And another problem that contributes to our mindset of having lots of work and not enough capacity is that we actually don't know how much work or how much capacity that we have. And this just makes our mindset and the way that we think about our problems that much worse. We often feel like we have a mountain of work waiting on us as developers or as development teams. And as a business consumer or a sponsor, it's like, well, I don't know how fast these guys are going. I don't know what they're capable of. We don't know what their capacity is. So it makes it very hard to plan around a development team. All of this situation, in my experience, creates a lot of disengagement with the development team, with the business from the development team. And disengaged people are just not going to be the ones that are eager to go to work and eager to get stuff done and thinking about how to continuously improve. They're just, really interested in getting through the day. Now I have another question, so these are actually the industrial problems that we've been trying to solve for quite a while, and we've made some progress, but for a lot of us, my question is, why is this still a problem? We're an industry of smart people. We've got great problem-solving skills, but we still have these problems. So in the pursuit of sort of fixing these problems, we've probably tried a number of things. I've seen shops that have decided to just chaos. And I don't like, chaos is, maybe a bit of a harsh term, but, this is individual heroic efforts by smart people who are trying to do things, but they do them usually in isolation. It tends to be chaotic. It tends to be heavily dependent on these people, and if they decide to leave the organization or they get sick, all of this house of cards falls apart, and we lose all of the benefits of having had them around. As an industry, we've tried waterfall or traditional project managements, but they're not well suited to knowledge work situations. We have these large batches of features that go through phases in the workflow. It's usually a single pass, and that workflow has a very long duration. Um, and that kind of approach to doing knowledge work, which is a very creative endeavor, um, tends to not work. Um, and there's also this mentality that, well, if we just manage the project a little bit better, but we've been trying to manage these projects, lots of education, lots of trying, and it's still really hard. So about 12 years ago, we had something pop onto the scene called Agile and Scrum. And these were our most recent and most successful attempts to rein in these problems we've had. And Scrum is actually a great methodology, and it has advanced the state of the art of work management and software and knowledge work a lot. Um, there are a lot of successful Scrum teams, but we're still looking for more. And I don't think that Scrum was ever intended to be the end of our process improvement journey. And one of the things that is hard about Scrum, where I've seen teams struggle to adopt Scrum, is that it tends to be prescriptive without understanding the context in which it's being implemented. The methodology itself doesn't really engender understanding and learning about the situation before it's put in place. And some companies, their culture, the way that they work is just not going to be suitable for a Scrum implementation. And lastly, just process adoption tends to be hard. And I like to say that this is because people are weird. Individuals are going to behave in unexpected ways when we try to change their work, change their job description, create new ways of interacting with business and development teams. And so when these things are put in place and people start to sort of push back or not do it right and start to try and go back to the old way because that's what's comfortable, this is where we get into that little bit of, what I call weirdness. And as someone who tries to help organizations adopt and have it take root, the people problem is actually the one that I'm really most interested in addressing. Because again, you have a team of very smart people. If you give them a task, they usually are pretty good at solving it. But you have to give them a task that they're well suited to do. And that's where I've kept searching throughout my career for the next thing that can help me do software delivery or do knowledge work. And that's when I found the Kanban method. And just before we get too far, I just want to make sure that we clarify the word Kanban and the definitions of Kanban and what I'm talking about when we talk about this, because they are mixed up. And if you go to the websites or blogs or books, you'll see the word Kanban used. And I just want to tell you to make sure that you know which Kanban you're talking about. So there is Kanban, and that's a Japanese word. Basically, it means visual signal, something visual. A story card is a Kanban. The Starbucks cup that you may have gotten this morning on your way into work is a Kanban. It's a visual cue to do something or provide some information. Then there's a Kanban system. And a virtual Kanban system is a work management technique that tries to introduce an approach of pulling work at the capacity of the person doing it. So virtual Kanban systems are usually described as a pull-based, WIP-limited work management technique. And WIP is work in progress. And then finally, we have the Kanban method. And the Kanban method is an approach to creating organizational capability to evolutionary incremental change. It happens to use Kanban, or it advises us to use Kanban, visual signals, and it advises us to use virtual Kanban systems to manage our work. But the Kanban method is really about creating a culture of organizational improvement using these other two things, Kanban systems, and Kanban. So when you do have a conversation about Kanban, I think it's very important that you understand which Kanban you're talking about. So as I mentioned, the Kanban method is an approach to incremental evolutionary process change for organizations. And this really starts to address the people problem, which I see as probably being the biggest of all the things that we need to overcome when we're doing process enhancements or process changes inside of organizations. And as I said, we start to tie in these other Kanban things, the Kanban systems, and basically what we want to do is we want to use the Kanban method to prevent overburdening and control the variability and flow. Once we start doing that, once we take the pressure off of people and we allow them to focus on just getting their work done, we see improvements. We see people now have time and space to do improvements. And now what we can do is we can encourage an evolutionary approach to change, where we can start to adopt the things that are most valuable to us from an improvement perspective. So just for reflect for a moment, what kinds of things cause overburdening and variation inside of your organization? The number one thing that I see often inside of organizations when I go talk to them is invisible work. And this may have happened to you already today, where someone came and tapped you on the shoulder and asked for your help. That work was invisible. We didn't know how it impacted our development team. Often we have company meetings or safety meetings or other kinds of work that are not related to the development team, but they take away from our time to actually do development work. Again, these are invisible work things. We don't know how much they cost us, how much they impact us, generally speaking. And so when we have tons of work and we're being asked to get through it, but then we're being interrupted by these little bits of invisible stuff, we actually can't even see that it's happening or how much it's happening. Another part that causes variability is the non-instant availability of specialist skills or collaborators. So I need someone to help me right now, and they have special knowledge or special skills to do my work. And this has probably happened to you guys at some point in your career. It's like, hey, I need to talk to someone about this feature. Can you book a meeting for next week? Well, that really introduces a lot of variation into your ability to deliver that feature. And this happens often with business and development teams interacting, or if you have a shared services model in your organization where like database administrators or DBA programmers are not, they're in their own team, and you have to ask for their time. That is an example of something that's going to introduce a lot of variation into our work. Information failing to arrive before it is needed. So this is usually because we don't have instantly available collaborators. What does this feature need to look like? Well, when the collaborator is not there or the information doesn't arrive, I actually often will go off and do something because we all want to feel productive and we all want to do something and feel like we're progressing the product forward. But because the information didn't arrive in time, we built something and then it might be wrong, and then we have to stop and redo it. We have to rework it. That introduces variation and contributes to the overburdening because we're introducing quality work that we create when we would rather be doing innovative work. So it adds to the overburdening. Work that interrupts other work. So this happens often where we're working on a project, but we also have some production support issues, and a production server goes down, or a business unit has a problem with an application. You have to fix that right away, but we don't see that work. We don't see the impact of those interrupting work items. Another one that we see often is just a variety in work in both the complexity and size. So, we probably all worked on a feature that is ending up to be far more complicated than we thought or much bigger than we thought. And again, that introduces variation, introduces overburdening because all of a sudden it's bigger or taking longer and someone had a plan. So now you're feeling rushed or overburdened. Changing priorities often introduces variation. Oh, don't work on that, work on this thing. So you put something aside and start working on something else. Um, when we have a team, but we don't have enough of the people on that team, that is a capacity constrained specialist skill set. So the, the canonical example in IT of this is quality assurance or testing. I have seen teams that have 7 developers and 1 tester. Um, I've seen development teams that have lots of developers and no testers. um, but that might be the number 2 there on the list. In that case, though, what we do is we have a lot of people producing a lot of work at a specialist skill set and just not enough capacity at that skill set to meet the demand being generated. And I would just ask you, are any of these present in your work environment? Are any of these things visibly to you present? Because all these things are contributing to overburdening and variation. So just quickly, why did I find the Kanban method that can help me start to solve some of these problems? And again, help the organization get better. And the one thing that I found is really important about the Kanban method is designed to be context sensitive. It is designed to foster organizational learning and be incremental and evolutionary, not revolutionary, not a big organizational change that is really going to be disruptive and painful for everybody, but it's designed to do it in small steps. One thing about the Kanban method is actually really relatively simple rules to govern a complex system, and a team of people is a system. It is a kind of software where we put a team together and we hope that it's going to function a certain way. So I would definitely say that a team is a system of people. One of the cool things about the Kanban method is it doesn't actually provide a lot of specific tactics that any kind of team can use. So this allows the Kanban method to be applied across a much broader swath of knowledge work domains. We've seen the Kanban method used in digital media. We've seen it used in software. We've seen it used in healthcare. But the cool thing about this, the fact that it doesn't specify a lot of specific tactics, is that we can actually have a methodology that is agile emerge from our learning and from our evolution. Because the Kanban method, and David Anderson, the creator of the Kanban method, fully embraces the values of the Agile manifesto, the thinking, the mindset that goes in there. No one would say that anything in the Agile manifesto is a bad thing. The other cool thing is that a lean method can emerge. So if you've read the Poppendiek's book about lean software development principles, you can use those as your motivation and your mindset, and the tactics that come from that can emerge as well. So the Kanban method is very tactic agnostic, and it's very simple, which allows it to be adopted and easily put in place in most organizations. And again, it will act as a catalyst for organizational improvement. So once you start doing these things and you start to see some of your problems, you will very quickly want to start to fix them. And so it acts as a catalyst for organizational improvement that way. So as I said, it's relatively easy and it's pretty simple. There are 4 principles which sort of guide the way that we are supposed to think about all of this. And it has 6 practices which are giving us some guidance on things that we should do. And it's really easy to get started. So the principles that are involved with the Kanban method, one of the first and foremost and probably most important one in all this is start with what you do now. The Kanban method doesn't want to come in and shake everything up. What it wants to do is it wants to understand the system. It wants to see how things are working so that we can actually find those improvement opportunities without being really disruptive and turning people off. People have a value system that is tied into what they do, what their title is, those kinds of things. And by starting with what we do now, we actually support those people. After we've decided to do this, we're just going to model our system. The thing that we need to do is we need to agree to pursue incremental and evolutionary change. Now, this might seem a little bit odd, but the Kanban method will act as a catalyst for change. We need to make sure that there is organizational agreement that we're going to do it in an incremental evolutionary way and that everybody's going to participate. So there's kind of two pieces to that agreement principle. Again, starting with what you do now and recognizing that this is probably more of a people problem than a technical problem, we have to respect everybody's roles, responsibilities, and job titles. Don't take anything away from somebody. You know, they have been doing things their career, they have responsibilities and skills and ways of doing things in their titles. You know, and we need them to be on board. We need them to become engaged with this team and participate in the change. And these kinds of things are going to then lead us to the last one, which is encourage acts of leadership. Every little improvement suggestion is a small act of leadership. Depending on what the scope of that improvement, it might be someone who's got a high level perspective, such as an architect. It might be a lower level perspective, such as a developer or a tester. Who has an idea about what we could do. We want to make sure that we create an environment where everybody can suggest how we would improve the process in small little bits. So that's the way that you should be thinking about the Kanban method. Now we need some things that are going to help us actually do that. How do I start to see these improvements? How do I start to give myself time and space to do these improvements? And that's where the 6 core practices start to come into play in your Kanban method implementation. And I actually have started to call these sort of meta tactics, you know, because they're very broad and very powerful statements, but there's not a lot of detail. So when we are asked to do these things, we can actually fill in the details ourselves and do what's best for our organization. So the first one is visualize, and this is actually a very powerful statement or a very powerful thing to do. And there's 2 aspects to this visualize. There's visualize your work, and there's make sure that your work is all visible. So here on this slide, we have a storyboard that has a whole bunch of user stories or requirements or work items on the board, and we can see it. These are the visual Kanban that we were looking to use to provide greater information about our work and our workflow. So in this particular slide, I have visualized my workflow. That's the columns on the board. So I've actually now, I can see my workflow. It's not just this thing that is on a server somewhere or an Excel spreadsheet or another system somewhere. I can see my workflow. And I can see my work in the workflow. So I can see what's coming, I can see what's in process, I can see what's done. And this gives me a lot of information about the current state of the system. So in this one here, we can see that we have a bunch of some new features that we want to work on next. We see that we have 3 things that are active. We have 3 things that are pending some sort of approval or some sort of user acceptance. And then we've got 1 that's done. So the cool thing about this, we can see the work that's coming. We can see where things are in the workflow. And we finished something. That's pretty cool. So we can see the progress. Also, because we can see the workflow, we can actually see where things are or aren't in the workflow and how the workflow itself is behaving. So quickly, I'm just going to flip over to this slide, which is maybe the same system going along, and I can see that there's more information that might promote a conversation here in the workflow. First, we have more stuff building up in our backlog, so that pile of work seems to be getting bigger. We have the same amount of stuff in active, but we have a whole bunch of stuff in resolved. So what is happening that stuff is piling up and resolved? That's something that you can, because of the visualization of the workflow, a question we can start to ask ourselves, because we actually want to get all that resolved work into closed, because that's where where all of our progress becomes real for the end users, for our customers, and something that we can cheer about. And one more thing about these visualizations. So we've got the visualization of our work, and we have the visualization of our workflow. It provides a lot of information very quickly. We don't have to talk about the state of the world anymore because we can see it. But one thing that we also need to do is make sure that all of our work is visible, that it is all in a card or in some sort of visualization that shows us that it's happened or it's happening. Um, as an example, I have coached some teams. Um, they have cultures that are really interrupting, a lot of shoulder tapping, which I don't want to stop people from seeking out help or getting help from their peers, but it becomes a drag on the project. And we need to see how often it's happening, because if we can see how often it's happening, we can actually maybe create a mechanism that would deal with the interruptions. So in some teams, I just counsel them to keep a track of counts of things that are of them being interrupted. So if they're getting a whole bunch of 5-minute interruptions, just keep track of them, and then we can start to add them up. If it becomes a big whole morning task or a whole afternoon task, well, we probably should create a work item for it and see how that work, see how capture some metrics about it or see what it was. Um, but the important thing is to just visualize, make sure that all of our work is visible and that it is a card or that we can see it and we can see how it impacts our workflow. So that's visualize. And again, as I said, this is kind of a meta tactic. This is a very common one. Card walls, storyboards, user story cards, work item cards, very, very common. I've seen examples of teams that are using Lego to visualize their work. Teams that have more elaborate spreadsheets, and those spreadsheets are valuable to them. It's just it was their way of creating information and awareness about their work. So the next thing that's relatively important and hard to do is to limit our WIP. And I like to coach my teams to think about this as we want to focus on finishing stuff before we start new stuff. We want to make sure that we're taking on the work that we can, we're working it to completion before we start something else, because the more work that we pull into our process, we start to do context switching. People often say that we're multitasking, but human beings we don't multitask. We actually context switch very quickly and effectively, but it does have a cost. It has a cost in time, it has a cost in quality. When our focus swings away from something, we lose some information, we take time to gather new information about the new situation, do the work, and then put that away and swing back to the other one. Hopefully we haven't forgotten too much, or we haven't introduced too much quality problems, but that's what the effect of too much multitasking or too much work in progress is. The other thing about when we limit our work in progress is we will naturally find the bottlenecks or the constraints of our workflow. Because things that are chronically over WIP limits tend to be bottlenecks or tend to be a place where the work is piling up and we don't know what exactly it will require to get it through that bottleneck more efficiently. As an example, if we could only test 2 stories a week, should we really be developing more than 2 stories a week? Because that is the quality metric or the quality aspirations of the team. We should only be going as fast as the slowest piece. And then with that information, we can now start to make informed decisions about how to model our system so that we actually make a balanced approach so that we can develop for and test for, and we're getting the stuff done with high quality. So you can see here that on the previous board we had some WIP limits, but here that were being violated. Here we put them back into balance. So we can see that we've got a little bit of new stuff. We've got 3 developers, we've got 2 users accepting these tests and stuff getting done. And this is now a balanced system. It doesn't usually take as long to do user acceptance as it does to do development. So we have more developers doing work, and we know that we're balanced and getting work finished. And we can see that on a cumulative flow diagram, when we adjust our WIP limits, we'll see those adjustments and we'll see ourselves coming into balance. The third tactic is we suggest that we manage flow. And this is a part of that start finishing and stop starting. Um, and there are a number of different tactics that we can use to manage flow. WIP limits is just one. Now, WIP limits are important because they actually allow us to create a pull mechanism for our work, and we find the constraints or the capacity of our system. But managing flow is where we find, like, small little interrupts or small little stalls in the workflow. And there's lots of different tactics that we can use, but we basically want to be able to make work start and be able to get through to the end of the workflow as smoothly and as quickly as possible. And there's a lot, again, as I said, there's lots of different tactics for that. This tends to have a really good impact on quality because, again, our focus stays on the task at hand. The fourth practice, and actually something that a lot of organizations do before they've done anything else, is they start to make their process policies explicit. It is hard to understand how your team is supposed to work if you haven't written down any of the rules, if you haven't written down any of the processes that are being used to govern that team's behavior. And this isn't a call to make a ton of process or an overwhelmingly heavyweight process. All it is saying, let's write down the rules about how we want to behave. And as soon as we write down the rules, now we can have conversations about the effectiveness of those rules. When you start a Kanban method implementation, your Kanban board is actually an explicit policy. It is describing your workflow. If you have WIP limits on it, it's describing where you've decided to limit work in progress. And there's an understanding of capacity. A lot of Kanban boards are augmented with definitions of done on a per column basis. As you can see in this little example here, we have columns that have work in them, and we have decided as a team to put our definition of done at the bottom of each column so that people know what they need to do before we should expect that item to move into the next column. And if you have policies written down and put into an area where people can see them and share and contribute, there will be a lot more collaboration around those policies and processes. And I find that this is really valuable for getting business more involved with IT. If IT says to the business, this is how we work, this is what we're capable of doing, you can now have conversations with your customers about how to improve your service delivery to those customers. And without all of this stuff written down, with all this stuff described, it's very hard to improve it because we're all talking about different things. So this creates a lot of common understanding about the process and our policies. One of the things that's also very important when you're going to be in a continuously improving environment is that we develop feedback mechanisms to tell us about our work, to tell us about our improvements and how things are going. The faster that we can do that, the more often we are course correcting, the more often we are sharing knowledge about ourselves with other parts of the organization. And with that knowledge now, it feeds back into the improvement, it feeds back into the workflow, it feeds back into the quality metrics, and we get a lot of value in quickly solving problems as soon as they pop up, as opposed to letting them linger, and then we build on problems or we build on flaky software, or we just don't address process issues. So in this example, we have a whole bunch of different feedback examples. So we have a team doing a stand-up, which is a great daily scheduling meeting. A stand-up meeting isn't supposed to be a review of the state of the world. It's supposed to be an opportunity to do your last bit of planning to make your day the best day that it can be, to identify problems or blocked work, because those are the things that we want to address quickly and get them flowing again. We also have technical feedback mechanisms. We have builds where we try to compile we have automated compilation on a build server to tell us if the check-in worked. We have unit tests that are being run by the developers and being run by the build to give us some quality information. And we also have organizational feedback mechanisms. In Kanban method, we call these the ops reviews. This is an opportunity to talk about the Kanban team, how it is interacting with other teams, the improvements it's seeing, because we want to actually drive further adoption more broadly into the organization. Um, because Kanban method implementations actually tend to scale very well across the enterprise because they're looking for problems, and we will often find problems at the entrance or the exit of the Kanban system, which will allow us to improve things within the organization by creating more Kanban teams or by having a larger view of the system. And so by creating the feedback mechanism at the organizational level, we actually stimulate that growth and that improvement at that level. And finally, once we're doing all of this stuff, once we've see all of our work, once we see all of our workflow, now we actually have a lot of quantitative information about our system. And we can now improve using a more scientific method to see if our improvements actually worked. I've been in a lot of organizations that were trying to get better. They were trying to get faster. And the first thing I asked them is like, well, how fast are you going now? And they don't usually have an answer. And I asked them a question, okay, well, you want to get faster. How much faster are you thinking that you want to be? And again, they don't have an awesome answer for that particular question. They just want to be faster. And that's really hard for a team to meet that goal because they don't know how fast they're going and they don't know what faster looks like. How much faster is acceptable? So now that we are actually visualizing our work, making sure that all of our work is visible, once we are measuring stuff through our workflow and through our system, we can actually now try to suggest little experiments that we think will speed us up in order to achieve our goal of improvement. And we can quantify how fast we're going, much faster we feel we need to be, or what our defect discovery rate is. One simple thing is how many bugs are you discovering? And it would be valuable to reduce the number of bugs that you are creating. I don't want you to stop discovering bugs because that's one sneaky trick to playing with these metrics. Like, well, if you want to reduce your bug discovery rate, stop discovering bugs. That's kind of the cheeky way, and I wouldn't suggest that you do that. Let's discover bugs, but try to reduce the number that we create. Because again, all bugs are just work that we have created. They didn't exist until we did something. So let's stop creating them and give ourselves time to do innovative work. With this approach, using a scientific method to improve, because we have data and information about our work and our workflow, it's now possible. And we can see which improvements work, which ones don't, which ones work best, which ones we want to do again or we want to expand upon. There's lots of power when we create this awareness and these little experiments to try to improve. So from that one, why are we doing all of this stuff? And ultimately, I want to help you understand that we're trying to create a learning capability in our organization that enables continuous improvement. We have all of our problems for the last 30 or 40 years because we don't know enough about how we work in our individual organizations. We do not try to continuously improve because the world around us changes, the organization around us changes. We need to be continuously improving because there's always going to be things that are popping up. Changes to the workflow, changes to the organization. We need to continuously improve, understand how effective we are, what it is that we need to do, and see if we can improve it. And once we do all this Kanban method stuff, we are creating an opportunity to have some time to fix problems. We are becoming more disciplined in fixing those problems. We are creating theories and we are running little experiments. And when we create a theory and an experiment, we give ourselves the opportunity to fail. And when we fail, we learn quite a bit. If we didn't experiment and we succeeded, we'd learn something for sure. But if we just fail, there's a lot of learning to be there because we learn from our mistakes. So by giving ourselves time and space to find and fix problems, to take a more methodic approach to trying to solve those problems and learning from every opportunity where we gather information about ourselves, we will start to make better organizations and better abilities to deliver software. So we've had a chance to work with hundreds of our ALM customers, and we've got thousands of engagements under our belt. And one of the things that we have seen over and over and over again when we see Kanban method implementations is we see a deeper understanding of demand and capacity. How much work do we have? What is our capability to deliver that work? We start to see teams that are continuously improving. And I've seen this with Scrum teams, but then I see Scrum teams that stall and they just sort of coast. Kanban method teams tend to be continuously ferreting out opportunities to get better. They're constantly trying to find the bottleneck in the process. And this helps Kanban method implementation scale across the enterprise as well, because those constraints may be outside of the team, but they see them as inputs or outputs of the team. So we expose those constraints all over the place. Kanban method teams tend to become very predictable because they like to start stuff and just get it finished and delivered. That's just the way they think. And because they're focused on that, they become quite predictable in understanding the kind of work that they're doing and their ability to deliver that work, which allows business and sponsors to more effectively plan, which is really what they want to do. They want to be able to understand that this feature is coming now, and they can do all of their planning for all of their work, and they can be more effective in their job. And overall, this whole thing tends to reduce overburdening. As soon as we put a Kanban system in place with WIP limits, overburdening almost disappears. We have to be conscious of the mindset of overburdening. But because we are managing the workflow, understanding capacity at various phases of the workflow, we are now able and generally will reduce the overburdening. And all this stuff tends to lead to happy people, which is really important because this is, again, a people thing. These are smart, creative people who we want to be engaged and excited about their work. So the better teams also tends to lead towards better business as well. So if your team is more predictable, your business can now start to build on that predictability and become more predictable itself. Teams that are more predictable introduce the ability to be more effectively agile, in the sense that we can try this feature and see if it works, because we have higher quality, we are more predictable, we can do small experiments as an organization, we can test features in the market, or we can test to see if things worked from a customer satisfaction perspective, and quickly adapt. Kanban method teams tend to be very good at risk management because they have an awareness of what they're doing. They can do these little experiments. They can pull work based on riskiness, or they can schedule work to mitigate specific risks. So risk management is sort of built into how Kanban method implementers eventually end up working. They tend to also have a lot more governance and change management because we have explicit policies. We have a lot of visualization. There's a lot of collaboration about the work and the workflow and how it should be changed. So we get a lot of crowdsourced governance and a lot of change management because of the incremental evolutionary approach that the Kanban method advocates. So one of the things that I want to leave you guys with is, like, if you start doing this stuff, you're going to start to find Kaizen opportunities. These are little continuous improvements, opportunities to be better. And imagine that we have an approach where we try to stimulate this all the time and called ALMAS. And having delivered a whole bunch of ALMAS engagements, where we find these three primary areas that I want to share with you are process. I think that's probably self-explanatory, that we will find process problems. One of the things that we will see, though, is technical problems. So the accumulation of technical debt, more brittle or fragile architectures, things that will tend to slow us down from a software creation perspective, will be visualized or will start to pop up as problems that we want to fix. And One of the things about process and technical and a perspective on quality is that quality costs. It is a cost that we have been turning a blind eye to in our industry for a long time. Well, we've been turning the cost of quality, but how much it actually would slow us down to do high quality. So where we see opportunities for improvement is actually in the development platform, in the tools that we use in the delivery of our projects. We can use tooling to make ourselves faster again. We can automate builds. We can automate deployments. We can automate testing. We can use techniques to create self-serve quality environments that we can test our software in. We can use development platforms to make ourselves fast again when we start to focus on better process, better technical implementations, and higher quality. So, and these three things are kind of interdependent on each other. So if I see that there's a bottleneck in how quickly we get builds done, we can use the development platform to automate our builds, which comes back to a process thing. Well, we don't have enough. Things aren't necessarily going fast as we would like. So then we can go to technical, and we can start to address our technical debt. The address of the technical debt is supported by the automation of build and quality, which feeds back into the process. So we can see that these three areas are quite interdependent and will generate opportunities for improvement in each other when we start to make improvements in them individually. So that's kind of the Kanban method and what it could do for your organization. And really, you have an opportunity just to discover and get better. When work is understood, we now understand our demand, we understand our capacity, and people are improving the system. And I can't emphasize enough how important it is to have engaged, empowered people in your organization. They are the thing that will power your improvements. They are the smart people. Nothing happens. No tool is going to go off and find improvements for you. It's the people that have to try and do this. And now we're going to have the opportunity to solve our problem. We are very good at addressing business problems or other people's problems, and we haven't been working on solving our problems. Our processes are important. It is important that we understand and we learn about our processes and about our capabilities and continuously strive to improve those. So, a little bit on that, on tooling. Team Foundation Server is a development platform that, imagine it happens to be very good with. It is a full application lifecycle management solution from idea to decommissioning. From a Kanban specific perspective, Kanban on TFS starts with two of the pillars that we talk about in our stuff. We talk about the ability to track work and to create tickets that represent our work. And we are also looking at the ability to visualize our work and the workflow and to generate statistics about our work and our workflow. In TFS, we have things called work items. And this is all the information that's important to us about this work. What is it supposed to be? Is there descriptions? Are there test cases? How much effort do we anticipate this will be? Who is doing it? Where is it in the workflow? We need to have that stuff inside of the work item. So now we can capture our work effectively. And because it's integrated into Visual Studio, it's very easy to do for developers because it has great hooks into a web app. It has a great web access interface now. We get basically the ability to access this from everywhere. And if you're really comfortable with Excel, there's fantastic hooks into Excel for TFS. So we now have an ability to put all of our work into the visualization. In TFS in 2012.2, we got this awesome ability to create more meaningful Kanban boards where we can actually add columns. We can rename those columns to be more meaningful to the team to describe the phase of life that the work is in. And we're also able to put WIP limits on. And we'll get told when we're violating these WIP limits. there's no rules that are going to stop you from doing that, because there's times when we do need to violate our WIP limits, but it's the guidance that we should always try to be underneath them. That the boards now provide that visual information about the work, the workflow, and the state of the project that is always there. We also start to get reports, the cumulative flow diagram. We start to get the Excel reports that are built into the Agile methodology, or the Agile templates, both the Agile one and the Scrum one. So we get a lot of information that's being captured for us by Visual Studio. And again, this is fantastic for distributed teams or teams that are not located in a big team room, because they can all share this very effectively. And one of the things that you will find when you're doing a Kanban method implementation is that we'll find opportunities to improve in a lot of different places. And Visual Studio and Team Foundation Server provide a very comprehensive suite of tools that will help us do better. They will help us support the improvement opportunities that we want. So automation makes our process faster. Test case management makes our, if we have quality challenges and we want to do better QA, there's test case management, which will be tied into requirements management and work management, which can be tied into technical things like versioning control and builds, and the automation, or the continuous audit testing of quality by the system itself. So Visual Studio is a very comprehensive platform to provide a whole bunch of features to help us support all of the improvements that we're going to find. So, broken slide. How can you guys get here? The first thing that we need to do is we need to find a leader. And this is a people problem. You need to have someone who's been here before, who is able to support the people as they start to try to understand these new things. It is really important to have a mentor as you go start doing this stuff. The next thing that's really important is to get some foundational knowledge. I've given you an introduction to the things, and I've used some terms here, but I haven't really given you enough information to go do this by yourself. So we have to all be on the same page as far as language, techniques, things that we're going to be using in the course of the adoption. So it's important to get some foundational knowledge that's shared across everybody who's going to be doing a part of the Kanban method implementation. And the next three things you can start to wrap your head around and do sort of right away. Visualize your work. Make sure that all your work is visible, that you can see it, or that you can understand that it has happened or it is happening. Try to limit your work in progress. The amount of waste that we have in our industry due to context switching is enormous. The amount of time it takes to get off of an idea, get into a new one, off of that one, back into the other one, is tremendous. And the introduction of quality deficiency that behavior has, again, is adding to the amount of work that we do, because when we have to fix all of those quality issues. And finally, number 5 should almost be number 1, but I sort of always leave it here because I've talked about the other stuff that's really important. But just make sure that it's important to focus on high quality processes, high quality implementations, high quality products. Because if we stop making poor quality decisions or poor quality implementations, we will have a lot more time to do cool, innovative things inside of our organizations. Also, come to the Imaginet website. We have a lot of information about Kanban, both information, talks about our training offerings, talks about our Kanban consulting offerings. I'm really excited about the Kanban method. I really like to help companies get better. And we can find all of the information about how we can help you guys get better at our website. So thank you very much for attending. I'm glad you've spent this time with me. I hope you're excited about Kanban, and I hope to hear from you again soon. Thank you very much, and have a great day.